In lesson 4.13, we are beginning to look at absolute value functions. Now, if you remember what an absolute value is, you may already have an idea where this is headed. If not, don't worry about it. We're going to go through everything over the next couple of lessons. So in this specific problem, 13.1, we are told that students in a math class were asked to guess how many objects were in some jar. And they wrote down their guesses here in this table of values. Got a bunch of guesses. Now what we want to do is figure out how far off their guesses were from the actual value of 100 objects. What we're finding here is what we're going to refer to for right now as the absolute guessing error. Now absolute in this context means that there are no negatives we're going to find. In other words, even if you find even if your guess is lower than the actual number, so for example, if you guess 75, you're not going to say that your error was negative 25, you're just going to say it's 25. So I'm going to pause the video for a second here, fill in this table, you should do the same, and we'll come back and see how we did. Okay, so I finished filling in my absolute guessing error column, and you can kind of check to see if everything matches up. One value I do want to point out here, specifically, is this value here. If the guess was 100, in other words, you got it perfectly, your error was 0. So that's kind of an interesting point that we'll see later. You'll notice the other thing I did is I filled in the axes on my graph here, because the next part of this problem asks us to graph or plot these pairs of values on this graph. So, in other words, I need to take this first point, 75 as an input, 25 as an output, and graph it. So I can think of this point as 75, 25. So I'm going to come over onto the graph here, and I'm going to find where 75 is, which is right here. And then I'm going to go up to where 25 is, which is right about here. And I'm going to plot a point. And I'm going to do the same for all of these points. If I have 110 as my input, as my guess, then 10 is my output, which is right here. Now again, I'm going to pause the video. I'm going to finish plotting these points, and then you should do the same thing. We'll come back together and see how it goes. Okay, so I've now finished graphing all of the points from that table of values. Now the next question we're asked is, looking at this graph, what are some observations we have? So let's look at it first, and then we'll go down and write some ideas. There are a few things I notice right off the bat. One, it's making kind of a V shape where one side goes up this way and the other side goes up this way. And if I kind of think about it, it makes sense that that pattern would continue. If you have a guess that is farther to the right, it is also going to be higher up. And if you have a guess that is farther to the left, it's going to be higher up because it's farther away from the correct number, so your error will be bigger. The other thing I notice is that this V seems to meet right in the middle at the correct guess, where when you guessed 100, you had an error of 0. And it seems to be symmetrical about that point, right? It is the same on both sides. So I'm going to write a couple of those things down here. One or two observations. It is V-shaped. It seems to be symmetrical. It seems to have a middle at x equals 100. Or I guess a guess of 100. We didn't really call it x. So there's some observations I have about this scatter plot. The last thing we are asked is absolute guessing error a function of guess? So in this case, we have to ask ourselves, remember, to decide if something is a function, does each input have exactly one output? And in this case, for any guess, I can tell you exactly how far away that guess was from 100. So in this case, yes, this is a function. Each input, which is the guesses, has exactly one output, which is the error. How far away was it? And that's pretty much what makes something a function by definition, is that each input has exactly one output.